We are live.
And
tweet.
Damien, every now and then your screen goes into a weird kind of out of focus, in focus, but it's kind of like
it's the LifeCam Cinema. I literally just dug it out of my office. I mean, I don't have the webcam on this laptop is the one at the bottom that goes up my nose, so I don't want to use that. So I literally just grabbed this one, and because of the light behind me, and because I think just the nature of this camera, it tends to jump in and out. Sorry, not in my office.
I mean,
today.
throw in a lens flare and it's artistic.
Yeah, that's true.
Really
Let's go with that.
Hooray! Well, congratulations. 2.1 shipped. That is exciting.
Well, 2.1 preview. Shipped,
preview. Right? As far as I'm concerned, it's out there.
Right. Yeah. So I'm at home today. I have a cold, so I'm not infecting everyone at work. So we did a huge release this morning. We finally got out the first preview for 2.1, which we've been talking about for a while. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the show. I think we should do the normal thing. Oh, Scott, you are here. You haven't said anything yet.
Hello.
Hello. Scott is on his laptop. So
yeah, I'm trying something.
Everyone's different.
Yeah, we're all different.
My Surface Book. I'm trying to use.
I'm just me.
It's a balance. I'm using a Surface Book and a standing desk, but I also have a bag of potato chips. Kind of a thing.
Great. That's great. John, do you love Community this week, or are you just?
I do love Community.
You know, over the Community, you love them still.
It was a pop quiz. You want to catch me off guard? And be like, I'm not really under the Community.
One day I'll get you, John.
Community. All right. Well, I'll start with this one. So this is cool. I think we may get back to this later. Yeah, this is cool. So Scott Hanselman talking about upgrading. So this was Hanselman.
Yeah. So it's still in the process, but basically, I'm trying to change the back end of my podcast. And while I was doing it, I frankly opened up Web Matrix and realized that my blog, my podcast site, all of my podcast sites are the same site. They're all Web Matrix-based Razor pages using Massive, which is the micro ORM from Rob Connery, and talking to a database that I don't want to pay for, running an old, with a web config with a bunch of assembly rebindings and redirects and crap. And I realized that I should just move it to Razor pages, and I thought it would be a big deal, and it really wasn't. I'll show it to you all a little later in the show. But I was able to upgrade it in a day, learned a lot, found a bug or two, improved some things, did some really cool stuff with IIS rewriting. The most significant thing about this particular blog post is that I had an XML file filled with a dozen or more URLs because I'm really obsessive about not breaking URLs. And there are really, really old versions of my podcast out there where people have linked to default ASPX show ID, database ID. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose that traffic. So I 301, and I also put in support for rel canonical for Google Juice.
Yeah.
All of that could have been pages and pages of me messing around in startup.cs, but then I've realized that Jake is his name.
Oh gosh.
Who?
The guy, the intern who wrote this.
Justin.
Who
was now an engineer.
Who now got it hired full time.
Yep.
Justin did this as his intern project, and now it's a supported and wonderful thing that's built into ASP.NET. Notice there where I say file.opentext IIS URL rewrite. I literally took the IIS file from years ago, popped it into ASP.NET Core. All my URLs continue to work without IIS. To be clear here, this is a format. I could have done the same with Apache mod rewrite files that I had lying around from WordPress. And actually did a little bit of a trick. Scroll down a bit.
Well, that's neat. What's happening there?
You did something weird. You double clicked in my text box there. Yeah, don't do that. Go down. So I've got a page. Go down. There's my old show. Okay, see where it says action? Basically, I wanted to have my on get, which is how I do my stuff. But I also have an on old show get, which is the map between the old show ID and the new show ID. But I didn't really want to reuse the on get method. I had to add a little bit of magic at the end of it. So I pass in handler equals old show ID, which is a magic Razor Pages thing. If somebody calls in with the old database ID, I look it up right there, GUID.ends-with, I grab it out. If I can't find it, I bail, no harm done. Otherwise, I redirect off to the permanent new location. So effectively, like 3 lines of code, a couple of copy paste, and an existing XML, and I've got 600 old URLs continue to work.
I was super happy with your use of custom handlers there.
Was that an appropriate use? Did I do it all right?
That's one I hadn't envisaged. Like I remember, like when we first prototyped Razor Pages, this was one of the first things I hit was a page that has, for whatever reason, multiple actions, gestures, whatever you want to call them, that the user can perform, and you want to just keep that code in the page. It's kind of the whole point. It's like this page is self-contained, it has a page model, it's properly factored, but there might be slightly different entry points here, whether it's a post versus a get, or a post that actually does a delete, or a post that does a move, or whatever it is. And in your case, rather than having to have a single method with a switch statement or all that type of stuff, like why doesn't the framework do that dispatching for me? Of course I want that type of support. And then we looked at the HTML5 form action attribute, which lets you have like an input element, a button that overrides the form's action for the form it's currently in. So you can effectively have multiple buttons in a form that go to different URLs. And we were inspired by that, and we built this custom handler thing. But you've used it for a slightly different purpose, but it works, equally as well, if not better, for this. It's great.
Yeah.
It made me happy to see the how well middleware works here, right? Just plugging that in directly, it's not a big deal. Like I remember I've worked with this over the years, and it's like, oh, I got to go in XML, and I mean, here it's you've got your existing rules, but you can add on additional rules with the fluent syntax.
And the other thing is the kind of the reminder to all of us and developers, the difference between rewrites and redirects, which is obvious to maybe old timers, but less obvious to others. Super useful thing to know and understand the life cycle, as it is a dance where the goal is to get everyone off to the canonical URL.
Right.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, on to the next one. But yeah, that was very cool. So this is from the Piranha CMS folks. So they've got a new update. We featured them a few times before. It's kind of a lightweight drop-in .NET Core ready CMS. The thing that they recently blogged about here was new project templates. So this takes advantage of the .NET new, so I can just install that package and then give it the name. So this is a nice, lightweight, pretty good looking CMS. So just I'm looking forward to playing with it on my own, but it's just nice to see that they've integrated that with the templates.
Yeah, it's nice when people go that extra mile.
Yeah, exactly. So this is neat. I've actually got 2 posts here on this. This is one from Troy Hunt. What he's done is gone through and taken his 500 million passwords and created a searchable database and an API around that. And so the use here would be, if somebody's reusing a password, you can maybe tell them like, hey, this is a common password. Now, obviously, some red flags might go off, and then you'll remember, oh, yeah, this is Troy Hunt, and he's done it the right way. So we don't just want to have a bunch of passwords, and we don't want to share out this bad information. So what he's actually doing here is he's using, if we see, he does have also a password count next to it, so you can see how many times some of these passwords are using, how common they are. So he's actually set up a searchable API for it.
No.
And well, no, but what's good about this is
freaking out because my password is pwned.
Yeah, they all are by now.
No, they're not. Like I just put in like 15 passwords that I used.
Yeah.
And one of them has been seen.
Why do you know 15?
Shut up.
I only know one. Like, you are using a password manager, aren't you, Scott? Do we get to shame you?
I am using a password manager, but I do have like my go-to, which has been used 1,700 times.
Yeah.
Oops. I think it might be time for you to completely retire your passwords.
Suboptimal.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's cool here is in setting up this API, it's interesting. There's this thing K-anonymity, and this is the idea that they're sharing a portion of the SHA-1 hash. So the idea is you can, put in a password, and from the front end, it's able to hash it, send back just that hash. So you can query for password usage without sending along your password. So he's got an API here, information on how to use it and all that. Of course, someone set up a NuGet package for this. So this is pretty neat. This is a .NET Standard 1.3 and 4.6.1 front end for this. And so the code for it, install package, and then just a few lines of code. Some ideas here is you can say like, querying based on a password, how many times it's been used, that kind of thing. Of course, since this is .NET code, you need to think about how this is being handled. But if you do have passwords, if you for whatever reason have passwords on your back end, this is something where you could look into. So, and of course, there are times where a user does send a password to you. It's just it was neat for me to see this, how there's this kind of thinking through. Nobody wants to store passwords. Nobody wants to track passwords, use them as little as possible. So that KN anonymity thing is pretty neat. James Newton King sharing about JSON.NET 11.0 release 1. So, the big kind of banner feature here is .NET Standard 2.0, but then also sharing about,
that's huge.
It is huge. That is this is obviously a hugely popular library, and .NET Standard 2.0 support is awesome.
What is something included with .NET, or do we just pull it in? Like we don't ship this, right? Or do we ship this?
So this is a long-standing. This is an interesting discussion.
Let me give you a very specific. Yeah. So I have my website up right now, right? Yep. I use JSON.NET because I'm using whatever came with Windows.
Yep.
With .NET. Am I using this one, or am I using something else?
Well, you're using James's package. So as part of 2.1, we can talk about this in a little minute. But yeah, ASP.NET Core does take a dependency on JSON.NET for better or worse, and I'll talk about some of the pros and cons to that in a minute. I think we have spoken about it on the show before, actually, but it's worth bringing up again. So there are a couple of places. The JSON formatters for MVC depend on JSON.NET. The project model, or what's it called, dependency model package, which is the thing that's used to kind of explore the dependencies of your project, to find out what packages you reference, what assemblies are available. That uses JSON.NET to read the deps.json file that gets deployed with your application in order to parse what versions of libraries that your app was deployed with. And I think those are the two major places where it'll end up in your ASP.NET Core application sort of by default. Now, in an ideal world, we would obviously have good JSON APIs built into the platform. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. I think we have a .NET standard library. The whole point of those things is that of a standard library is that you get all the useful stuff so that you don't have to bring in packages and make decisions about things. Like .NET should just have good JSON support. But we all know the long history of that over the past 15 years, and JSON.NET has appeared as the clear winner for one reason or another. There are obviously other libraries available for JSON. There's the Jill library that the Stack Overflow folks maintain, which is a bit faster, but not as feature rich. And there's actually a few others on NuGet as well that people maintain. There's also some experimental JSON parsing functionality that the .NET team has been working on in the CoreFX Labs repo, which uses some of the new span and memory sort of no allocation patterns for doing that, which can have huge benefits, as you can imagine, for server workloads when you're dealing with lots of JSON input and lots of JSON output. My ideal future would be some type of result where we end up with a really good foundation for JSON reading and writing in the platform. So that is like .NET standard library, and .NET includes really good low-level, no allocation, very fast, functional JSON readers and writers. And then JSON.NET would re-platform on top of that in some future major version to add all of the goodness that he does, like the serializers.
Right.
The
so like
support. 15
years ago, I built a bunch of stuff on top of XML reader and writer, that XML DOM, because it wasn't cutting it for me. That kind of a level of layering. Yeah,
and James will be the first to tell you that like JSON.NET is the kitchen sink. Like he has heaps of features in there.
Sure. But sometimes so many features you don't know what to use.
Right, but it's also because he works very hard to support sort of using JSON in all the various .NET environments. So yes, that's why you end up with it right now.
But then, what is the relationship between the JSON.NET we ship, the one he ships? And then also, I just found out about Microsoft ASP.NET Web API Client.
Yep.
Which is 5.2.4.
Yes. So first question, the relationship is they're the same thing. So we literally ship his package. We depend on his package. We don't repackage it. We don't rename it or fork it or anything like that in this case. It is the same package, and then we simply stick it in the Visual Studio installer. We reference it from the templates, et cetera, et cetera.
When I upgrade, I've upgraded everyone. I've upgraded, like you used the new one I just upgraded to.
Yeah, so if you pull in JSON.NET 11 in your project, you're upgrading it for everyone in that project. That's just the way packages work.
And right? I just did that. I have 11.0.1.
Right, and that in a normal, like in a lot of projects, that's not a huge problem, right? And James is very good about not making horrible breaking changes from release to release, because you can imagine his package is basically the center of the universe on NuGet.org in a lot of ways. For a product like Visual Studio, which is built by literally many dozens of different teams, which all might want to take a dependency on JSON.NET for different reasons, this has historically been an issue where everyone wants to ship their own individual version of JSON.NET because, for whatever reason, they took a dependency at some point in time, but only one can be loaded. You know, ultimately, .NET really only supports one version of a given assembly being loaded at a time. And certainly NuGet only supports one version in the graph at any one time.
Yeah.
And so if you're writing code for Visual Studio, you must use the version of JSON.NET that Visual Studio uses in devenv.exe, right? And I think it's version 9 something.
Yeah, yeah.
And so you do have to, this is a problem as your applications get bigger and you start bringing in more dependencies that may not agree on what version of a common dependency they need. If those things introduce, binary incompatible changes, you can find yourself in a lot of heartache. And this is where DLL hell and all those type of things come from. And it's not unique to .NET. You get this problem in JavaScript, you get it in Java, you even get it in C++. But in .NET, we have a somewhat unique behavior around this very strong type identity, which is tied to the assembly. And so it can lead to problems. So you just have to think about it. So my point was, in the future, I think you will see us try and move to a situation where the default experience for something like ASP.NET Core doesn't include any third-party dependencies. In fact, in 2.1, which we can talk about in a minute, we've made a quite substantial change to the default experience that starts us along that road, and we can talk about that after John's finished.
Well, when we get all to the end, I'm looking at 10 lines of code that I've written 6 different ways about HTTP. Basically, it's like go to a URL, get some JSON, put it into an object.
Oh, the Web API client thing.
I've done it client.getAsync. I've got read all text async, get string async, with streams, without streams, with allocations, without allocations. And that would be an interesting thing to talk about. So I want to talk about that. Put a pin in that.
We'll put a pin and we'll come back to that.
All right.
Awesome. All right, let me wrap up here. So yeah, just some other small things in addition to the .NET Standard 2 support. He's also got a generic type converter, JSON converter of type T. So that's kind of neat. There's also included in there, there's small type here. Let me blow that up. There's a Unix date time converter. There's no standard for serializing dates in JSON, so he's got this Unix date time converter, which is useful. And then also JSON path, which is neat. So being able to query using JSON path. So
was there async stuff added in 11 too? I thought there was some async stuff added in 11.
I'm sure there was somewhere in here.
Just search for async. Control F. And sync read. Maybe that was in 10. That's all right. Maybe you just fix some stuff in 11. Maybe I got confused.
All right. Yeah, I think there was something down in the footer here. JSON 10.0 release 1 had async stuff. So,
right.
There you go. All right. So this is interesting. This is from Andrew Locke. So what he's talking about here is top-level MVC parameter validation. So what he reviews is, okay, you can put data annotations, you can put required, and you can put data types like an email address. That's been supported for a long time in ASP.NET MVC, ASP.NET in general. You can do an entire model validation. So you can say if a model is valid, that's been supported for a while. There is also the concept of parameter validation, and that is where you would go through and you would say in a parameter, you could say required email address, and that would apply to this parameter. However, as of ASP.NET Core 2.0, this didn't actually work at that level.
Yeah, we didn't support that.
It was so you could put those you can put those parameter attributes on there, but they would always be validated. So now for ASP.NET Core 2.1 that is supported, so you can go through and you can include those. You can also, as he calls out in there, the difference between required and bind required, and links over to an article by Philip on that.
Yeah, and so the other change that was supposed to come out of this change, but unfortunately just got missed in Preview 1, it'll be in the next preview, is the same for top-level properties on Razor page models, so that you'll be able to have a string property or an int property, a non-complex type property on a page model and put a validation attribute directly on that. That was a bit of feedback we got very quickly after 2.0, and so it turns out they're both backed by the same mechanism, whether they're action parameters or properties on page models. So we did the underlying work, we hooked it up to controllers, but we just missed hooking it up to page models in Preview 1. It'll be there in Preview 2.
Very cool. Okay. All right, so we have the Tekken Power. So this was the Valentine's Day release of round 15. So this is round 15 of them. I believe the one that ASP.NET Core does best in still is this plain text. So still respectable here. I don't know if you want to. I think we've fallen a slight bit. I don't know if you want
I wouldn't say we've fallen. There's other people have appeared.
Yeah, we haven't fallen. Other people have gotten
We
higher.
actually got a lot faster. So this is the first result.
That are higher, like people's PhD thesis, or are they things you would actually go live with?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things to point out here. First of all, this is the first result we've had for ASP.NET Core 2. The previous results are all ASP.NET Core 1.0 or 1.1. This is the first time we've hit more than 2 million. So we actually made quite a substantial increase from 1.1 to 2.0, which these benchmarks show. Most of the people above us, if you look at the first column on the right-hand side, John, where it says CLS, that's the classification. And there's micro versus platform. And then there's full. So you can see most of the ones that are above us are classified as platforms, which effectively mean it's just a server. There's no logic there's no middleware, there's no dispatching, there's nothing like that at all. It's literally just an HTTP server. They're good luck writing an app on that. So it's really just showing how performant the underlying HTTP server is. We don't have a platform test as yet. That would effectively mean having there just be Kestrel and no dependency injection and no ASP.NET Core middleware. We actually have some prototypes of what that would look like right now, and we're planning to do that as part of 2.1. That is, we plan to submit a platform level test for plain text. Our hope is that by doing that, we might actually end up in the top 5 here, maybe even in the top 2 or 3. Once you strip out all of the functionality and you just look at the Kestrel web server, things get incredibly fast very quickly. Now, but again, all we're talking about is effectively a micro benchmark to measure the overhead of processing HTTP. The other thing, as you pointed out, was a lot of these things in here you've never heard of. They're literally either very new or they've been around a while, but they don't have a lot of use yet. Some of them are brand new this round, which is why we haven't seen them before. So like there's the new top is a Rust based server, which is doing very, very well, Tokyo. And you'll note that the next two are C++. They're both variants of the same library called ulib. We have Go in there using the fast HTTP server. That is not the built-in Go HTTP server. It's a different one. And then there's a number of Java platforms, the most common obviously being, or probably the most well-known being Netty, which has been a common target for us that we would like to get parallel with, if not surpass. And then Undertow has been around a while, but I'm not aware of it being very widely used. It's actually a very nice looking framework. If you've ever looked at Undertow, it actually looks a lot like ASP.NET Core in a lot of ways, and it is extremely fast, as you can see here. But to your point, they're not. The claim that we like to make here is that if you look at ours, we're listed as a micro because this is literally a piece of middleware that runs here. There's no MVC or anything. There aren't that many above us that claim that are micro, and I don't think there's really any above us that you would call mainstream. I might be going out on a limb there. I'm happy to. The ones above us that particularly, certainly nowhere near the scale, I think, or as widely used as us. So yeah, well, I mean, we're doing pretty well, but we want to continue to push here. Now, the next thing is that this is just plain text. We care a lot about the rest of the scenarios here. There's basically 2 more scenarios. There's the JSON serialization scenario, and then a series of different data access scenarios. The JSON scenario, you'll have to scroll down a bit further to see us, unfortunately. We have made improvements here in 2.0, which is this one, but we still have a long way to go. So there it is. So you can see we're like 55% of the top result. So, it's not terrible. And certainly not like in the bottom 10% like we used to be. But again, there's a lot that we can do to improve here. The biggest difference here isn't actually the JSON part. It's that the plain text benchmarks are pipelined, whereas the JSON ones aren't. And for those who haven't heard that term before, it simply means that when the connection is made to the server, you can send multiple HTTP requests to the server before you've received any responses. And so rather than saying request, response, request, response, you can say request, 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 and the server replies in the same order, response, response, response. For the plain text test, they send 15 pipelined requests and then get back 15 pipeline responses. So the server can do very efficient things regarding reading data off the TCP connection, that type of thing, when it knows there's going to be requests in the queue behind it before it sent any replies, which is why the plain text ones are so much faster. For JSON, that's not the case. And so any latency in the stack will now completely burn you when it comes to a benchmark like this, because any microsecond of latency just shows up as stalling because you can't make the next request, right?
Right.
So we've got work to do there still, but we're not too bad. The data access ones is where we really fall off the mark right now. But I am happy to report that we've made some very good progress working with the member of the community who owns the MPG SQL Postgres SQL driver for .NET. And we hope that the next version of that driver, I think it'll be version 4, which will be out soon, hopefully, will catapult us right up towards the top of these benchmarks. So we've identified a couple of really glaring bottlenecks in the data access providers, and so far we've determined it's not actually a problem with ADO.NET per se. It's generally the actual code in the driver, so Postgres, SQL client, MySQL client, et cetera, et cetera. And by removing those bottlenecks and applying the same type of rigor that we did with the Kestrel work, we can get incredible improvements with those. So, for example, if you scroll to the top of the Fortunes test, Fortunes is basically, it does a database
That's
query
a full app, right?
And renders HTML, right? We are hoping, and we have data right now that is public. It's up on a repo on our GitHub org that will place us hopefully within the top 10 of this result, just with that Postgres driver update. Because everything here is Linux, and most of it is going against Postgres. You can see there's actually a column there, DB, which says what database they're talking to. You can see most of them are Postgres. There's a Mongo, and there's a couple of MySQL. But we're focusing on the Postgres one. So far, that seems to be the top contender for our Linux customers. We're also working with the SQL client team, obviously, to improve their Linux support and Windows support so that it's competitive as well. So really good progress being made here. And in the next round for Tekken Power, I think you'll see finally our entries in these data access ones start working their way up to where they should be.
So I think 2 questions on this. I guess I should go with first the Postgres one and database drivers. Does the work with the low allocation, the spanity, and all that stuff, does that help there?
It would. We haven't used any of it yet. So far, most of the work has simply been sort of more traditional, pooling, low allocation checks, pooling, reusing objects. Avoiding contention is a really big one. So locks, basically. Anytime you take a lock, you're going to hurt yourself in a micro benchmark or a bench or not so micro like this. And it turns out in the database stacks, the biggest one is the connection pool in .NET, which is very typical for database drivers. It isn't actually a primitive in the framework. They're like a database driver author can't just new up a connection pool and say, I'm going to put my connections in here and get a good one. They have to write their own. And so that's where we found most of the problems, if I recall, was that the locks in the contention were causing contention in the connection pool. So when you have 256 clients all trying to make requests at the same time, most of them just end up waiting for a connection from the connection pool to be returned. And once we removed that contention, things kind of opened up and we got breathing space. So we have a lot of room for improvement still. As you mentioned, we've got great improvements in the sockets API in .NET Core 2.1, which is announced on their blog post today, on both Windows and Linux. And we have all the new memory and span stuff, which we expect if they're plumbed through these stacks, we could get some benefits from too. Some of those things might even benefit from changes to ADO.NET. So we're also looking at that, sort of seeing how far can we go using the existing API shape for ADO.NET, and then what could we achieve if we were to add some new APIs, or not deprecate, but de-emphasize some other APIs and say, well, if you want the fastest path, use these APIs because a client can really optimize its performance when you use these, and avoid these methods. Pretty much anything is on the table. We want to make sure that we can get a really good experience. We also built just a completely managed Postgres driver. We just like got rid of ADO.NET completely from the bottom up. We called this top down versus bottom up analysis, and we did the bottom up work. We said let's just start with a socket connection and just talk raw binary to Postgres using the specs on how to talk to Postgres, and we built a very basic driver, and then we ran fortunes on that, and that proved to us that there was nothing inherently wrong with the networking stack or C# or the .NET runtime or the garbage collector in terms of being able to achieve these types of numbers. But then we had to figure out, well, was it ADO.NET is the problem? Is it the drivers, et cetera, et cetera? So for people who are interested in this work, you can go up onto github.com/ASP.NET/data access performance, I think is the repo. Can you verify that for me? Data access performance. Yep. And this is where we're doing all this work. So there's a sort of a V team, as we call them, a virtual team in Microsoft that spreads across a bunch of teams, EF group, the ASP.NET group, the .NET group, the SQL client group, the community for the MPG SQL. And we meet weekly and we talk about, and we have been doing experiments to figure out how we can improve this. So my hope is that for the next round of Tekken Power, or even sooner than that, on their new continuous results, they now are publishing results continuously on a different on a different area as part of a CI, that we'll start seeing us get up that list.
That was my next kind of question on there. There is, I don't know, I forget how to link to it, but there is a thing, I guess it's off their blog post, but they do have that CI thing, and they run the results continually, right? So,
yeah. And I think they're chatting. Actually, Brian, who runs the Tekken Power benchmarks, is in the chat right now, and I see he's talking to a couple of folks. Someone's bringing up TLS performance and how, in today's world, that's really all that matters, is the web is moving to TLS by default. And I totally agree. In fact, I asked Brian about this a couple of weeks ago, and I asked, what can we do to help get TLS added as a scenario, or maybe as a pivot to all these scenarios, so that you could see the performance for all these stacks with TLS and without for all these benchmarks. And so we're going to try and help them sort of get that over the line this year. That would be fantastic, I think. I can say that the .NET Core Kestrel TLS performance has improved dramatically since 1x. In 2.0, we made huge improvements, and then in 2.1, the CoreFX team has made even more improvements in the SSL stream class that provides the TLS support, both on Windows and on Linux. And so our TLS results for plain text and JSON are actually really good. And so like we still get with over 1 million requests per second, for example, like we drop from 1.7 to 1.1 or something when you add TLS, which is massively improved on what it used to be. Like it used to drop down to hundreds of thousands, low hundreds of thousands. And so I'm actually feeling pretty good about our raw TLS performance in Kestrel, but I'd really like to see that added to the benchmark so that everyone can see that for all stacks.
Cool. All right. I'm done screen sharing for now.
Cool.
For now.
All right.
So 2.1.
2.1. Yeah, let's talk about 2.1. So as I said, we dropped the release today. It's been a long time coming. Our plan is this is Preview1, all right? And it's really, really important that as many folks try this out. Please, I'm asking. I know it's work. There's no go live license. Please don't deploy this to production and then ring us up for paid support. But if you're a happy consumer of open source, we would love you to really try this preview and exercise it with your existing apps, and plus also try out the new features, of course, because there's actually quite a lot of new features in this release, including the return of SignalR, some fantastic new HTTPS by default features, a whole bunch of other stuff that we really need to get feedback on. And if we get that feedback now and early, we can act on it for the second preview, which we hope to have out maybe 5 to 6 weeks from now. And then after that, we really won't have much chance to act on feedback again, because we'll be moving into an RC phase. And we really don't want to be introducing breaking API changes if we can help it in the RC. That would really be the final chance to make any sort of behavioral change. That would likely come with a go live license. And then hopefully very shortly after that RC, with very minimal changes, if any, we'll be able to finalize towards a final release. And that we're planning for that to drop before the end of the first half of this year. and everything kind of continues along the current trajectory, and we get good feedback and good usage, I think that will be, we should be able to hit that. So to that end, we did a blog post. We had a bunch of blog posts today, actually. John, do you want to bring those up?
Yep.
So on the .NET Web Dev and Tools blog, which is at what, blogs.msdn.microsoft.com/ that's the .NET one. So that's the .NET team's post.
So we have the .NET and EF ones.
Then there's the EF.
So let me skip.
And then there's the ASP.NET one. Yep. And so they all cross-link to each other. So, you know, find one, you'll find all of them. So first of all, you know, how do you get it? Install it. You can go to the link there to download the .NET Core 2.1 Preview1 SDK. For those who hadn't followed along with the version number fun, this is the version number of the SDK that correlates to the 2.1 runtime. So this 2.1.300 is the version of the SDK that maps to the 2.1 runtime. Once we get to 2.2, those numbers will align again. Okay, and there's been a whole series of public announcements about this, but this is the last release where there'll be this discrepancy between the SDK and the runtime number. At least the first two versions match now. So you install that. That'll get you the new runtime. It'll get you the new .NET CLI. If you're a Visual Studio user, you have to use the preview channel. Okay, so that is 15.6 preview 6 as of today. Obviously, that's side by side, so you can do that side by side with your normal VS if that's going to be a problem for you. And then you can create .NET Core and ASP.NET Core 2.1 projects in there and work with them in there. You can obviously also work with the 2.0 and earlier projects in there as well. Also, a reminder around the impact of machines. The SDKs are side by side, as are the runtimes, but when you install the new SDK, it does become the default. So if you, they are backwards compatible, and they're meant to be, but if you do run into an issue working with an earlier project, so a project that targets 2.0 or earlier, then you can use a global JSON.
Let me help with that.
Oh, let's do this live.
Can you see my screen?
I can see your screen.
So if I go .NET-info, that's I have the new preview. You can see preview and preview.
Yep. So you've got 2.1.300. So 2.1.300 is the salient thing there. That's the one that maps to the preview we dropped today.
Right there. And I have a little preview. This is a little tool. This is not something we're shipping. This is something I blogged about. It's actually, if you go out here and I type where .NET SDK, little command line tool that Fanny Renders made. I go .NET SDK list.
Ah, nice.
And we should ship something like this. This is just a batch file.
Yeah, it looks like the ordering is incorrect on that batch file, on that command too.
Incorrect because of this.
Yeah, so they're not treating that as a semantic number, which they need to.
But if I go like, which is hard because
I appreciate that.
the point is there's these things here.
Yes.
And that really is just a wrapper on top of doing a dir.
I see. Got it.
Then if I go and say, like you said, .NET new global JSON, and open that, I can go like this.
Yeah, it stamps the current one in for you.
Go like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh. See?
Yep.
So to Damien's point, while it will upgrade to the preview by default without asking, you can get your old SDK back if anything goes wrong or you have anything weird happening.
Right. And if you do find something, please log it. Because as I said, they're meant to be backwards compatible. So if we do accidentally introduce a breaking change in the SDK, that is, you're using the new preview, but you're working on a 2.0 project or a 1X project, and you find a problem, log it, please, so that we can become aware of it and make sure it gets fixed. Yeah, so that's all good. The other thing, John, if we could flip back to you, John, scroll down a bit. We are doing a series of posts. You can see it there. I've listed out all the posts that we plan to publish this week for new features in ASP.NET Core as part of this release. A couple of them are live. You can see that you've already clicked on them. So the first one obviously had there is a big change. To use this preview in Azure App Service, you need to install a site extension. So this preview and previews moving forward will not be pre-installed into Azure App Service. The proliferation of previews was just becoming a little too much for them.
So that's just because it's preview, right? Like
that's just because it's preview. So obviously the 2.1 final release will be installed on Azure as normal, and likely the RC will be as well because it will have a go live license, but the previews will not. So if you wish to deploy a 2.1.0 preview site to Azure App Service, you'll need to read this blog post. You have a couple of options. You can install a site extension that brings the runtime with it. You can do a self-contained deployment, which we've always supported, which means you bring the runtime with the app, or you can use Docker, which obviously brings the runtime in the Docker container. So you have 3 options there, but it's something to be aware of. If you just right mouse click publish in VS to Azure and App Service with using 2.1 Preview1, it won't work. All right. So you need to make sure you read that post. After that, we've got the introduction to HTTP Client Factory, which I believe is going to go live imminently. I hope Glenn is watching and he's busily typing that up and editing it now. We had Brian obviously talking about that a few weeks ago on this show. The improvements for using HTTPS, we now default all of our templates to HTTPS by default. Kestrel will now listen on HTTPS by default, assuming that you have the new developer certificate installed. We have a tool that will manage the developer certificate for you and also trust it for you on Windows. If you run that, you can see the blog post talking about that there.
I got a quick question for you on that. I ran into a thing, and I don't know how real world this is, but I ran into a thing prepping for doing this for Virtual Academy, where I wanted to demonstrate doing this, and I wanted to remove that certificate and then reinstall it. I wanted to basically get this prompt.
I've done that. You bring up the cert manager, you delete the cert, and you run the tool again.
Okay, so those are the steps, right? Just go and find the cert and delete it.
Yep, absolutely. And it has an appropriate friendly name. It's like ASP.NET Dev Developer HTTPS certificate or something like that. So if you delete that, run the tool again, and you can run the tool in a what if mode that will tell you whether it's there or not, I believe. So that tool is there. And if you're using Visual Studio, the next version, 15.7, it'll take care of just laying down the certificate for you as part of the normal file new process if it's not already there. But for now, you need to run this tool. And then there's new middleware to do smart HTTPS redirection. Scott was showing us his use of the existing rewrite middleware before to do redirection, but we've actually written a very specific one catered just to HTTPS redirection with a whole bunch of logic that understands, what ports is the site currently listening on by looking at the Kestrel bindings and those type of things. It also supports environment variables for flowing in the front end sort of HTTPS ports and addresses if you're running behind a reverse proxy like IS.
So 307, is that specific? I'm not familiar with that one. Is that an HTTPS redirect?
That's probably the HSTS one.
Oh.
So that's the last part, which is we have HSTS middleware now as well, which is enabled by default in the full app templates. You can see it right there, such that once a user has gone to the site once and gone through the redirect from non-secure to secure, they won't go through that again. They'll always just hit the site securely. That is disabled in development environment because you don't want to do that on localhost because it'll apply to every single site running on localhost and you'll get yourself in a bit of bother. So in the templates, that's only enabled when it's running under the production environment. And then similarly, all templates now will have a launch settings file. That used to only be in the VS templates, and in the command line that used to be optional. If you create a new project from the command line now, you will get a launch settings file. And if you run it using .NET Run, it will use the launch settings file by default, which means that you'll be in the development environment by default, which is a huge improvement to the developer workflow for those who are not using Visual Studio. If you're using VS Code and you just want to run from there, you don't want to have to manually futz about with your environment settings to make sure that you're running in the correct mode.
Setting environment variables.
Right. And so that'll all just happen for you by default now, which is critical to getting this HTTPS workflow to work well. Read that post, try it out, and please give us feedback about how well that's working for you. And then lastly, there's a whole bunch of new schema based configuration you can use for setting up HTTPS in production and in Docker containers and things. And we did all the work with the Docker tools in VS team to ensure that we flow all the right information through when you run your app in Docker for HTTPS and all that type of stuff as well. So hopefully we've done the end-to-end well there and it works well for everyone in all the scenarios.
Cool.
If you go back to the Signaler, that's a good one. Yeah, obviously Signaler, there's a we did an alpha last year, but there's an update now. It's a part of 2.1, so there's a getting started building a chat app with Signaler post there as well. So people should follow that along. And then this is a very interesting one. So compatibility version. People might remember back in System Web, in web forms, we introduced a rendering compat mode, which is super critical when we want to enable ourselves to be able to develop and sort of modernize or change the platform over time without breaking existing applications, we need some way of being able to use feature flags or version flags in the application so that people can opt in to new behaviors. So Ryan has written a really good blog post here that talks about the reasoning behind this, what we will do and what we don't do. This is not a license for us to break things all the time. We are only going to use this very sparingly when we identify a behavior in the framework that we think is incorrect or is just bad and we think there's a better way. We will introduce the better way or the correct way behind this version compatibility flag, and you'll have the granularity of being able to say, I want the new behavior for this but not for that. But the new templates will always just will roll you forward and opt you in to the latest version of stuff. So this is something to be mindful of when you're updating your 2.0 app to 2.1. If you're using MVC, which I'm assuming most folks are, is you'll likely want to set this to use the new sort of compat version of MVC. You want the 2.1 behaviors, not the 2.0 behaviors, if that makes sense. And that is covered in there's a small migration guide in the bottom of the lead post where we announced 2.1 Preview1, and it takes you through the steps required to move an app from 2.0 to 2.1. So yeah, down there, and it talks about setting the compat version, step 5 in the second block there.
Right.
So that's another good one. So there's a whole bunch of other posts that will be coming out over the next week as well. There's some stuff about things we've done to help with GDPR and cookie policy and consent UI in the templates is there by default now. That'll come out in the next couple of days. There's stuff about our changes to how we host in IIS or improvements to how we host in IIS. I think that one's going to go live today. The HTTP client factory I talked about. If you scroll back up, I can quickly look. See if there's anything I want to really shout out to. Oh, Razor UI and a class library. You had Javier on last week, I think, talking about that. So we'll have a post about that. There's some manual steps you have to do now. In Preview 2, we plan on having a class library template for doing that, which will get you all going.
Hosting stuff is neat.
Hosting stuff is good. We've improved.
Global tools. Did you talk about global tools?
No. So that's in the .NET Core blog post. We now support global tools, which is very similar to the NPM notion of global tools.
Including .NET Watch Run, right?
Yeah, so this is what this post will be. This one here that I've said is we will talk about how we've migrated some of our tools, the ones that my team is responsible for, .NET Watch, .NET User Secrets, .NET SQL Cache, those type of things. We've migrated those to global tools. And so the existing project or CLI tool ref will be deprecated for those tools moving forward. The feature still works. You can still build project tools, but we won't be shipping those as project tools anymore. We're going to be shipping those as global tools. And we will pre-package those in the CLI from Preview 2 forward. In Preview 1, we have the new dev search tool pre-packaged. We'll pre-package more moving forward. And we invite folks to write their own tools. You just publish them. They're basically console apps that you have a property on that says pack as tool. And then when you run .NET Pack on them, it does all the right things to put them in a NuGet package that you can then push to NuGet. And then people can do .NET Tools install -G as you've got there, whatever your package name is. And then the command appears on the path. So it's pretty cool.
Pretty neat. All right.
And there's a whole bunch of other stuff there. Functional testing for MVC apps. We've done a bunch of work to make that better. We'll have an article about that before the end of the week. All the changes we did to the identity UI in the templates, that's now all shipped as a library. I think Javier showed that last week as well. So we'll talk about that. And then we have this generic host builder for people who want to use the patterns of our web host, our startup class, the dependency injection and logging and all that type of stuff. But they don't necessarily want to host a web server. You might just have a console app that monitors for messages on a RabbitMQ endpoint or pulls stuff off an Azure Queue or something like that, but you want to use the same kind of app hosting model as ASP.NET. We have this generic host functionality of doing that now in 2.1. So
it's really cool, like having these every other week, the morning, the feature PMs coming on and showing those and seeing how the different pieces fit together. Just things like the Razor, separating Razor out, and then how that also kind of fits in with including identity UI as a library.
It's funny you say that. Those are. I love it when that happens because we get to essentially do one set of work, but kill two birds. Like it really is. Like we wanted to reduce the complexity of all the identity stuff and the auth stuff in the templates for a very long time. And separate to that, we had customers asking us, why is it so hard to work with Razor in libraries. Now, in MVC, in core, we had done work to enable or to make it better for pulling in controllers and those type of things from libraries with the application parts feature, but we hadn't really gone all the way with Razor. And so that's what we've done now. And we did that as part of doing the identity UI. We were like, well, if we do the identity UI this way, we'll be able to solve this problem for everyone who wants to ship, bits of apps inside a library. And then we came up with some very simple changes to the Razor View Engine, which enabled us to do this really nice composition thing where you can knock out stuff from the library, but keep the other stuff as well, or have them work together, which I think Javier showed last week. So we were really happy with the result of that. And again, we really, really need folks to try it out now as part of the preview so we can get that feedback. Log your issues on the GitHub repos, ask your questions on Stack Overflow, reach out to us on Twitter, ask questions on the community stand-up in any given week, and we'll do our best to help you along and address any feedback that we can address. So,
all right. So
Scott, I heard a little birdie told me, Scott, that you had updated a site to ASP.NET Core 2 this week, and I wonder whether we shouldn't just update it to 2.1.
Well, how much time do we have? We're almost an hour into this, though.
I don't know. What's the YouTube video say at the moment?
I think we started at 3:45, and now it's 4:45. Almost.
Well, we've got about 8 minutes. It shouldn't take that long.
Is it hard?
No, it's really not.
All right. Well, let's give it a try.
Let's try it. I mean, we can only try, right? We can try and fail, or we can try and succeed. So.
All right. Well, one thing I wanted to ask about really quickly, and you go ahead and share that and present to everybody for me, John.
Mm-hmm.
Did you lock there?
Yep, it's locked.
So I've got this little poor person's database, where I go off and I call an API that's a very expensive API.
Right.
Like a 7-second API.
Okay.
And it gets a megabyte of JSON. So I have the caching and the hosting environment, the logging and all the stuff. So here's the standard cache. I have a HTTP client, static rather than injected. Although David doesn't like that. So I inject this so David will respect me.
Yep.
Check to see if it's cached. If you got it, bail. Otherwise, lock it down. Check again in case something crazy happened in this white space here. This is the part where I go and get it off the disk. If I'm doing development, I haven't put in like if development, if production.
So you're blocking on the cache population. That's what I'm seeing here, right?
I'm blocking on the cap population, yes.
And you're doing that because you want to avoid the scenario where the site goes live and lots of people hit it at once and they all end up trying to do the expensive path?
Or that the cache expires every few hours. So it's possible that I get 4, 5, 6 people concurrently backing up.
I see.
And
is that bad?
I'd rather not have a 7-second long API call.
Okay.
I mean
they'll all have to wait that long, obviously, but that's fine.
If my point is, if 2 or 3 people call that API, it could piss off the API people.
Fair enough.
It's not a huge problem, but this
I get it.
This is my.
Oh, it's not your API. I get it. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, this is a third-party podcasting API.
I get it. That makes total sense. And you're doing an async way. You're doing the right thing. You're doing it asynchronously. And
yeah. Okay, so here's a couple of thoughts.
Yeah.
First, this was the get it off the disk, and then async. And Dave was teasing me because it's like, do something that's a megabyte you shouldn't be doing, but do it asynchronously. Hold it in the large object heap for a nanosecond and then
forever.
And, you know what I mean? And then deserialize it. And he's like, well, why can't you deserialize it in chunks? Like,
well,
I don't know.
Non-trivial, but yes.
Well, but I shouldn't have to write that stuff.
No, the stream, you should be able to use a stream reader to do that for you by passing it into the JSON reader.
Do the right, I'm a stickler for there should be an API to hide that stuff from it. So then I could do it this way, but that's synchronous.
It's synchronous in what way?
Like I don't get to do any async stuff here, right?
Right. So then this is the problem with the JSON stuff today, is that you can pass in a stream and say, hey, JSON text reader, go and read me stuff off that stream. And the stream has async APIs, but I don't believe that the JSON text reader will read them asynchronously. There's no deserialized async as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
And that's a non-trivial amount of work to add that.
That's async, but this isn't quite there yet. And again, this is 5 lines of code I shouldn't have to write. I'm being selfish. I'm like, this is what I ended up with. And even then, if I wanted to make this 1 line, I have to take this await and stick it in parentheses.
So what exactly are you trying to avoid? What are you trying to optimize for? Because there's a few ways you could go here, right?
I want to go and get this thing the right way in 1 line, where I say, go and get this thing and cache it a while. From here, with this is the type I want, get it done. Figure it out.
Yeah, there isn't really a 1-line way of doing that for large responses. The reality is once you get over a response, there's echo now for some reason. Once you get over a response of, say, 70 kilobytes, you're in a land of having to be cognizant of the fact that if you read all that into a string, it's going into the large object heap. And reading it in chunks, as David said, isn't trivial, because for JSON it means that you effectively have to do partial parsing to ensure that you've pulled enough that you can feed to the serializer.
I put in code earlier. There's a standard way to do it, which is the kind of look for the ending the ending mustache. Right. Spin through the array, assume it's an array of stuff, look for the ending mustache of each top level object and deserialize. My point being that it's such a common scenario, I felt like I shouldn't be writing so much code.
Yeah, and that's a perfectly reasonable expectation. It is incredibly difficult to do this. We don't have it. We don't have it.
And I'm not trying to fight, but
no, I get it.
When someone says it's incredibly difficult, then it should probably be done by smart people.
No, it's it's incredibly difficult for smart people.
Oh, well, either way, it still should be done, because
I don't disagree.
Given that I'm doing a 4-page podcasting site, it ain't my job.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Anyway,
the reality is most people just do what you're doing here.
Well, this isn't bad.
It works just fine for them.
It just kind of uses up some memory and kind of sucks for a second.
Yeah. Well, when you say for a second, it's not just for a second. If it goes into the large object heap, it's going to stay there for a long time.
How long?
A long time.
Hours?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Because you may not have memory pressure again, right? So
it'd be nice, because once I'm done, it's all in here, but then the string is just sitting around,
Yeah, and that's just...
It's kind of a bummer.
Yeah.
For putting it, and given that I run my podcast on a shared $7 a month Azure site.
Yeah.
The thing you have the most of in Azure is not compute and not disk, it's memory. So I have 500 megs of memory. I just stick it in memory, and it sucks.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's interesting. The folks on the chat are like talking about this right now, and all the suggestions are perfectly reasonable ones. The trick here is that you're downloading a blob effectively. You're saying, get me this huge JSON document. That's why I'm reading it right now.
Yeah.
And then you loop through it. So you can't just turn this into a simple IEnumerable that deserializes one show at a time. You are getting a document, and then you have to deserialize it as a document. There is no simple way of saying, deserialize this JSON piece by piece asynchronously so that you only ever load so much into memory at a time.
I don't have that code here. I have it in another branch, but there is a way to do it one at a time. There's sample code for JSON, but you have to go and get involved in JSON.
It's JObject. Yeah. At that point, you're basically
JObject parsing, and when you see the end,
you see tokens at that point.
You do tokens.
Yeah.
It's not my job. I just want this list.
So I completely agree. I would love there to be a future where you can do what you're doing here, and it is smart enough under the covers to not, pollute your large object heap. To do the type of things that we do for our file upload feature, where it's still disk when you get beyond a certain size. Now, obviously, it's much easier there because it's just bytes. We don't care about the structure. For things that have structure, it's incredibly difficult. And I know James has talked about this. We do it for HTTP. And so Kestrel does this behind the scenes, right? We have to potentially parse very large uploads, and it's a protocol. It's HTTP, and we built a very specific pull-based HTTP parser to do that.
This model of loading a non-trivial but not massive amount of stuff into memory and holding it read-only has worked for me as a technique for 20 years.
I do it in live ASP.NET.
It's just a nice, clean way to do things.
Yep. And for data that doesn't change often, it's perfect.
You cache it. In this case, it's 6 hours. I'm going to have a webhook to that the API will call me to when the back end changes. I can invalidate the cache. Yeah, it's just a nice clean way of doing things. And then if you go and look at the shows, they look like this. You see that J?
Yep.
That's that. And this was generated very easily by one of the JSON paste tools. And what's cool about this, you notice I do some weird mapping, like title became show title and number became show number.
Yep.
That's simply because I wanted to take the existing 10-year-old Razor or 8-year-old Razor from literally from Web Matrix and paste it in.
Yeah.
And it freaking worked, man.
Yeah.
So this is this old Web Matrix code. I just dropped it in. And one of the cool things that I liked about this is the only improvement that I made was this as awesome URL, which is a extension method that makes a nice URL.
Yep.
And other than that, I pass in this index model, which is, I guess I don't have that in Chrome, in code. I'm actually wishing I could have more fun stuff in Chrome. Not Chrome, rather. I keep saying Chrome. I mean code. Like the lack of support for Razor pages in here, I'm gonna have to use Visual Studio.
Yeah, no, and that's something we want to do eventually, by the way, is get Razor support in VS Code. But as you can imagine, it's non-trivial.
It's really close though. Like it hasn't slowed me down. I haven't needed to leave, but it's kind of. So the I couldn't figure out another way. I have a flag for whether I'm on the home page or not, which is based on whether or not I've got this kind of complicated URL thing here going, because someone can say /show number, or they can say /show number /slug, like Stack Overflow.
Yeah.
So this is actually optional, and that gets stuck in here.
Yep.
And I'm a little bummed this doesn't belong here.
Okay. In what way? You want that to be on the page?
It belongs down here on an extension method.
Yeah.
We're in use. All the use is.
It doesn't. You know why? You know why?
Why?
One's pattern-based routes and one is attribute-based routes, effectively. So routing basically has two entry points. They're quite different. What you're doing there by saying add a page route is you're effectively adding to the attribute route table, whereas convention routes work a completely different way. So
I'm saying that it's hard.
I appreciate what you're saying.
It's hard to teach a 2-day class where you tell people what this is for, and then it breaks a rule.
Well, you know how we solve that?
You do it with an extension method down here.
No. You know how we usually solve that? We don't show convention-based routes at all anymore. Pattern-based routes we don't use.
So tell me a way to do that in Razor pages.
No, we don't use pattern-based routes. Like, so you do it just
you don't do this?
We don't have that. Yeah, we don't call that overload at all.
Oh, well, that showed up there by default.
Yeah, the Razor pages templates don't have that anymore. Yeah, they just call use MVC without the route. Yep, just the use MVC. Yep, we just do that now generally.
And then everything else is attributes. So you just move away from
attribute routes. Yep, and then it's just
So then I've got a non-trivially sized XML file we talked about, and I use that rewriter, which is glorious.
Yep.
This is my little debugger for that, which we kind of need. Someone needs to write a route debugger like Phil did so many years ago. This worked out stunningly wonderful, though. And then down here, I go and get those shows. And if I got a show, I'm on a show page. Cool. I also grab the next 16 shows so that I can, at the bottom of the page, say previously on.
Yep.
And then just in case someone just went to /6 instead of /6/R6 show, we canonicalize the URL and say, no, this is the right URL.
Nice. Very good.
Then, and again, I know people get pissy about else's and stuff. They've been giving me shit about it on, excuse me. You know, I'm inconsistent in the way I do my curly mustaches.
Yeah.
I'm too old to care, and I don't care about your opinion.
Good.
This one is the home page. I skip the first one on the home page and then show the last 16 that aren't the current one.
Yep.
Then I have to say on home page, and this is kind of a bummer because later over here, I need on home page in order to say, if I'm not on the home page, show the sponsor for the show. And this is an interesting one. I'm on index.cshtml. This is all the Twitter cards and the Facebook cards and stuff. That's only appropriate if the current model is set. Okay. And this is a little weird, right? Like here I'm saying model.last_show in a fragment on this section that's referred to from the layout, but then pulled out of here.
Yeah, this is still an area where Razor composition isn't particularly great, which is where you need to pass data between the active page or view and layout, and have tunnel it through layout to partials and things like that. We have ideas on how to improve that in the future, but today you're basically on your own coming up with.
And you'll notice that there's some tricky things here. This is actually a great little lesson in Razor. This little chunk here.
Yeah, I can see your escape sequences and
here. I've had to put it in a parentheses. Because the leading path is in this already. That's one. I had to escape these because they're Twitter names. Here, I did the kind of the old style Razor thing. Here, I wrapped the whole thing and I did a plus. Yes, I am capable and I know what I'm doing, but I just, it's messy. And then in other places, I do the new string dealy.
With the string interment.
String interment.
Interpolation, sorry.
String interpolation. Okay, so then in my core, it's a NetCore app 2.0. I pulled out .NET Watch. Which was confusing because just for folks that, like, for the 6 people who are still here, it's Microsoft.net.watcher.tools.
Yes.
That is different than .NET.watch, which is the name of the new global tool.
Yes, so we actually leveraged the fact that we gave the project tools horrible names, and we just said, screw it, we're going to give the global tools the name that matches the command line that you run. And so we used that so that we didn't have to break the existing packages.
I think, so right now it's .NET install tool. .NET Watch -G.
Yeah, or -G, .NET Watch. I think they both work, but
yeah. If you don't -G, it says no local tools. I always kind of thought it would be add tool, but whatever. The point is, though, there's still no functional way to insert these. The only thing that I think is sad about that is that most people want. I like the convenience of being able to hand someone the project and having the tool come along for the ride.
Yeah, I'm in two minds about that. NPM didn't seem to worry about that. They have another way of solving that. You can do sort of local invocation. We are solving this for Preview 2, I believe. So in the .NET Core post,
solve it, but it was just one of those things where I have a setup moment.
Yeah, I just want to touch on this though. So like with both of those tools you have there are changing to global tools in Preview 2. I think the Secret Manager already did change in Preview 1. The CodeGen is changing in Preview 2, so you won't see these references anymore. There is no plan to backfill the feature experience gap for dealing with .NET CLI tool ref. So there's no NuGet dialog work. There's no command line to add these. There's no work on the backlog to do that. Global tools is really the feature that's being pushed. They are looking at the problem that you explained, which is if I just, you hand this project to someone and the project requires .NET user secrets or whatever, wouldn't it be nice if it could be automatically acquired as part of the normal process of restore? I believe they're looking at in Preview 2. They're looking at a concept of local restore, which NPM has a similar idea around. Now, I'm still in two minds about that. I actually kind of like the fact that all those things just disappear from the project, and global tools are global that by nature. Maybe there is a benefit. Maybe there is some way that you could specify you want these things. But I mean, it's not uncommon. In fact, I would say it's almost idiomatic in almost every open source project.
I totally get that.
To be a bootstrapping process.
The benefit that we had is I could have 2 different projects with 2 different versions of different tools.
You could have a, say again? Yes. The versioning thing is coming up as part of global tools as well. They're going to solve that.
Right. And I'm just saying that local tools, I like reliable, compartmentalized, almost containerized builds.
No, I get it. I totally get it.
Anyway, get restore and then just run your app, and it's going to pull in just.
I still find this weird because this is neither a tool nor a NuGet package. It's like a thing that jumps in and minimizes your stuff. And
well, it's a package that contains MS build targets, which is perfectly
the fact that it like takes over your build is just weird.
Well, it doesn't take it ISO. I mean, it attaches a target to the build, basically.
Yeah, it's just, it's not intuitive because it doesn't look like anything other than a reference.
Well, okay, maybe my argument to you would be that's because your frame of reference for what a NuGet reference does is still stuck to what it was in 2011 and 2012.
I would say
the reality is that NuGet packages can bring in targets, and we do it a lot.
No, I would say that 95% of NuGet packages aren't doing that. Right?
No, I agree, but we use it a lot. There's a lot. Yeah. There might be more in your graph than you realize.
No, I understand. I recognize that it's more in my graph, but I would argue that other than Microsoft employees that work on tools,
sure,
ask 100 .NET developers and one knows that this is a thing.
I appreciate that. I mean, I think what Mads went for in that scenario was that you add the package ref and then its magic happens. You don't have to do anything. Like, it just does
That's
what
fair.
it does.
That's fair. And I love that the magic happens.
Yeah. Now, to that point, it's actually an interesting segue. We're running out of time. We should wrap this up. But the build bundler minifier thing is not part of the ASP.NET Core project. It's not owned by either team. It's not supported. We need to come up with a strategy for some inbuilt support for doing this moving forward. The problem we've always had and been burnt by is just how quickly the community continues to move when it comes to the state of the art for JavaScript, TypeScript, CSS, less script, blah 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 blah. And a lot of those best in class tools aren't written in things that we can load as part of the normal .NET stuff. Like, they require you to install Node, or they require you to install Python or something like that. And that's just not a good experience. So we still don't have a great answer, but we're continuing to investigate what we can do to really solve this for people out of the box in the future.
Oh, and the tough part also is that there are other things, right? There are other tools. And some people would say, oh, just use Smidge.
Or Webpack.
Somebody else's, or Webpack or whatever,
And I think that's fine, but as the product owner, I still believe we should have a solution in the box, and we should own it, and it should be something that you don't have to worry about, and it shouldn't be
something basic that just works, and then I'll upgrade.
It should just work, and then if you want to use something else, that's great.
The way that we did IoT, where it's like IOC, where it's like, yeah, I've outgrown this, now I'll get autofact.
Sure, if you need those extra things, you can go and do that. But I want that grow up to be a grow up and not a cliff. I don't want you to use the inbox stuff and go, but I need to do SaaS, and we go, sorry, you have to completely change it to this other thing.
One other thing that's getting frustrating is I'm getting sloppy because I just don't care about these versions. It's too confusing. You can see a couple places where I just said, oh, screw it.
Hang on, but why are you using? You're using the all package? Why are you bringing in logging, caching, memory, rewrite separately at all?
I don't know. I thought I needed it.
No, you've got the all package. Right? So all includes everything. And so what you're doing is potentially misaligning numbers. The whole point of the meta package is that it brings everything in.
Well, so then is this obligatory? Like, is this just assumed to be 03?
Well, remember, the .NET CLI tool reference has no relation to the package reference stuff. So you'll need to put in the version there, whatever the version.
That's why that kind of sometimes gets confusing.
Yeah, it does, and that's one of the other problems with project tools is that you can't deliver them with meta packages, and those type of things.
So sometimes I'm just like, screw it, it's confusing. If it still compiles, if it compiles, I'll ship it.
Well, you've just put a typo in line 13, so at the end of line 13.
Oh, Otney?
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Somehow 122 people are still watching, so we haven't.
I have no idea why that is the case.
Oh, it's a big day. We did a new release, so people want to watch.
Well, they should leave because I suck. Anyway, the point is, though, it was like, I think I put, I don't know, 10 hours into this and minimal work, and all of it was really the multi-threading, which, like you pointed out, arguably I could have just put a lock around an object and called it a day.
Yeah.
But David and I were all, and we did pick up one bug.
Yes, that's right.
Which was this. I wanted to put the title here in view start. And then later on the page.
Compose on it, right?
Compose on the title.
Yeah.
It turns out this view data somehow has a different instance than that one.
Yeah, that's a bug in Razor Pages. Yeah, it works in views. It doesn't work in Razor Pages. So we logged that bug.
That is a bug.
Hopefully we'll fix that in Preview 2.
Yeah, but that was easily solved by just putting a constants in and doing the composition here. Also, one Razor Pages ism. Razor Pages used to have page.title, which was a thing.
You mean Web Pages did?
Web Pages, rather, pardon me.
Yep.
That doesn't exist.
No.
So I fake it.
Nice.
I faked it like that because I wanted to make all of my code. One of the things is also...
you know what's funny about that?
What?
There's a new feature in Preview 2 that does exactly what you're doing there, where you can back properties with view data via an attribute on your page model.
Ooh.
And then
Can I
we're
do
looking
that up here.
Yeah, no, in your page model, in your index model, and then we're looking at ways to make it easier.
Dude.
Yeah, like you can do for temp data.
Hang on.
Yeah, string blah. Yep. Get set, and then you just put view data on that, and that'll just be set, and it'll be so basically now you can you can either override. You don't have to override the key; it'll just derive it from the property name.
Oh, even better.
Yeah,
I would want to override the key though.
Yeah, there's an overload that lets you override the key.
That's hot.
So that, and then the other thing.
And then I would just have title, and it's done.
And then the other thing we're looking at doing is the consumption side of that is possibly having a razor directive. So you could say at view data at the top of this page and say like, generate me a property called this.
Yeah.
That's a string, and it would just back it with view data for you. So now you can just like you could have a property on your layout, which is a string, which is backed by view data, and you don't have to do the dictionary crap everywhere. You just pass things around like they're properties. So
one of the things that's so cool about this is that I know that there's still a group of people that think that Razor Pages is like entirely new third thing, but it's just not. I feel like I'm using MVC when I need to, and I'm using something lighter when I'm not.
Yeah. I mean, I sometimes I bristle a bit when people call it something lighter, because
no, not lighter runtime. It's just lighter.
It's just the syntax. It's like syntactic sugar on top of MVC.
There's just less code. I'm writing less code.
Yeah.
If you look at this site, the yucky bit is dicking around with HTTP, and then this double check, just like we went and did async and await, and that made async and await stuff easier.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's time to build something into the framework or the language to hide these double checks.
It's interesting that a lot of the stuff in the M language that was part of the what was the project called?
Oh, like Midori?
Midori? Yeah, they introduced new primitives for these type of things, like barrier primitives in the language for safe reading and writing. It's obviously, again, non-trivial. I've used that word a lot, but I totally agree. It would be something that would be nice if there was stronger support in the language and runtime for those things that didn't.
I know that we have the support in the base class library, but I want, where did David and I put it? Something which is just like, go get this, hold it for X amount of time, and then leave and be done. Mm-hmm. That's all. Just.
You mean like you basically want some higher level APIs for doing common patterns for like getting data, putting it in cache, and then doing something else with it, right?
Yep, that's all.
Yeah.
Just straightforward stuff. Yeah. So can we upgrade it in 5 minutes, 6 minutes?
Yeah, I think we can. I mean, I did last night. I updated. Assuming it works, we could try. So all you really have to do.
Well, let me do this before upgrade.
Okay, you're gonna. Very good. Let's time box ourselves because I got to take my son to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in a couple of minutes, 10 minutes. All right, so go to your CS Proj, change the TFM to 2.1, change the version of ASP.NET Core.all to 210-preview1-final. 2.1.0-preview1-final.
So when we say final, it's not really final. What does final mean?
So, so final is when we build from our CI server, the versions were preview1 - some build number. So we need a version that's later than those. Semantically, if we just dropped the -final, that's actually an earlier version than everything we've been building in our CI server for the past 4 months. So we have to put something there to say this is the latest one. It's after all the CI builds. Now the CIs are producing preview2 - some number builds. So it's just a quirk of how semantic versioning, Semver version 1 works, that it's all just alphanumeric sorting for everything in that tag. Semver 2 supports a plus with build number stuff. But NuGet and the project system doesn't really support that stuff. So anyway.
So it's needed to indicate that it's not final.
It's needed to indicate that it's the final build of Preview1.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. So, and then do the same thing for the version of the CodeGen tools and Secret Manager.tools. Same version. Although actually use the secrets you can just delete because that's a global tool now.
I don't have it installed though.
Well, you will.
Because I do have user secrets. I don't want to lose them.
Yeah, no, you won't lose them, right? They live in user profile in a file. The tool you can just install the command line .NET install -g blah 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 with the version number. All right. So that is all you should have to do to update the project. Then build it. Let it restore and build. Did it build?
Briefly though, .NET install tool
-G
-G
.NET -watch I'll use a secret. Sorry. Yes, that's what we're doing. And you'll need the version number. Yep. And what did it complain about?
Failed to download package.
Unable to find package.net. Is it the right name?
User
-secrets, I think. Yep. There you go.
Oh.
All right. So build this, restore and build.
I think build implies restore.
It does. Yeah, it does. Well, so
see this here, right here? See how it does that twice?
You know why?
That's because that's tools.
Yes. That's one of the other problems with tools.
That's always bothered me.
And it does them in parallel.
I know, and
why they're interleaved.
They could have just changed the string, but they didn't.
I know. So yeah, there you go. So there, it's built. So you've updated to 2.1. Now, if you want to make
it still runs though.
Oh, of course it will. Now, to make it idiomatic for 2.1, to add the HTTPS, redirection, to change it to use the 2.1 conventions for MVC, you'll have to go and update a little bit of code in your startup CS.
I will do I'll do a blog post on that.
You can follow the blog. You can follow the guide. In the blog.
I went and I installed the built-in what's it called? I installed the SSL dev test certificate thing.
Yep.
Error.
What's that saying?
I'm in development mode.
So you'll need to add a launch settings. It looks like yours doesn't have a launch settings. So you've converted this from a previous project. So you didn't file new in VS previously, which is why you don't have a launch settings file. So you'll want to go and drop one of those under the properties folder, or just copy it from do a new 2.1 app and copy it from there. And then you'll get the right setup, sort of the environment stuff and everything. So when you run, it runs under development, because that's just run under production, and that's probably why you're getting some errors.
Oh, I'm not showing you this.
No, yeah. I'm looking at your lovely link background. Yep, so we're just creating a new project. Let's go into the properties folder and grab the launch settings. Yep, grab that file, copy that over into your other project. Then we'll open it up and we'll just edit the ports, or affirm the ports. Maybe we'll just reuse them.
In a properties folder?
Yes. Yep. There you go.
I can only do it when no one's looking.
All right, so open that up. All right, so you can see it's mapping some ports for IIS and stuff. I mean, if you never use this in VS, you could leave that out, but I'm assuming you will.
There's that new one there.
Yep, so that'll pass that, and then the IIS stuff, and see it's setting the environment to development. Now, where it says poop on line 19, you have to change that to your project name. That profile name has to match your project name, which is the folder that the project's in.
And I noticed we've got this SSL thing. I don't need to do anything over here, though.
Right, so then...
doesn't that need to change?
Where are you? What's this? Oh, this is VS Code. No, you shouldn't have to do anything there. It'll redirect.
Are you still loading it up into Netcore App 2? Oh, you're not, see?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see that. What do you... I see. Yep.
Otherwise, it won't know to launch that one.
Yeah, VS Code has its launch semantics, which points deep inside, so you'll need to make sure that's updated to the right path, obviously.
Okay, F5.
And then if you wanted to get the HTTPS redirection to work, you'll need to add that new middleware.
The new middleware, yeah.
Yeah, and probably the HSTS.
And ironically, I actually have it in my XML file.
Yep. Oh, explosion.
Address already in use.
You must be running already.
Nope.
Well, someone's using 5,000 already.
Oh, you're right. That's how you get caught over in here.
Yes, in the shell.
Shells you cannot see. Loading.
Loading. Let's see if this works. If it fails now, it'll be something in your site. We'd have to go and debug.
Clearly my fault.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Look at that. Works.
So then other things I can do another time are use sockets and get off libuv.
Yeah, it's not the default yet. We hope to do that for 2.1, but it's not ready yet. But you could try that.
Down here.
Use sockets. Yep, which uses .NET sockets instead of libuv for Kestrel.
I can.
You can move to the .app package instead of the .all package. We didn't talk about that today. We didn't get enough time, but I think I talked about it. I think I spoke about it previously a few weeks ago, actually.
A little bit smaller package.
A little smaller, has less third-party dependencies, and it changes the rules around what versions we allow in the project so that you're a little safer. It's a little harder to break your app by bringing in a different dependency.
Is that preferred, or how
it's preferred? It is the default. I would recommend people move to .app. We're keeping .all around for convenience sake, but .all will go away in the next major version, most likely, and all new projects are using .app now.
So even though you were like, why are you using these? It seems like those are still available.
Oh yeah, I mean, obviously you can include individual references. They'll get knocked out by the meta package if they're the same version. If you try to, the problem is when you have version mismatches. And so if you actually tried to do that now, you would get a warning because .app has the behavior that if it detects a version mismatch,
right,
it'll either fail or give you a warning, and you'll have to suppress it manually. So there are safety rails now that tell you when you've potentially getting into DLL hell.
Nice.
Yeah,
this is great. So I'm up to date. So now all I need to do is go over here and read this article, which is how to use this on app service.
Yeah.
Which means ultimately it's just install this extension.
Yep.
And or do a self-contained one, which I like doing.
Or do a Docker, or do Docker. Yep.
Or use Docker, yeah.
So if I use that site extension, is that something that when it goes live, is it going to, you know what I mean, when it's no longer preview?
You'll have to uninstall it at that point.
Okay.
Yeah. It takes over the path for your site and overrides what .NET means and moves it to the preview. Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Dramatic zoom out.
Oh, we're going to have to do it incredibly non-dramatically today.
It's more of the dramatic step over to the window.
Yeah, it's basically, let me just see how far my head...
Just lean in and then lean out.
Like this.
Dramatic step back to the window.
Fall off my chair.